down to earth. Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
To your beautiful center. I don't know if you realize you have one of the most beautiful buildings in the teaching, I think. We've seen a lot of churches, and this is one of the most beautiful. And I noticed this morning that you had so many children. And that is such a wonderful thing. There are many, many churches that wish they could attract children, because that's growth. It's, you know, and what a greater gift can you give to a child than teaching him this teaching. So it's wonderful that you have so much new life in here, and it's wonderful to see. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of officiating the marriage of Reverend David and Cynthia, and that was a wonderful celebration. And it was a surprise to a lot of the people there at the conference we were at, and it was wonderful. It was just a very sweet, sweet, wonderful moment, and it was very great. So when I heard that the topic this month was the Four Agreements, I was very excited because, you know, this little book is very powerful. If you haven't read it, I saw it in the bookstore, pick it up, because I have read this book many times throughout the years, or at least gone and reviewed the agreements, and you always can learn more from it. It's amazing. It's very simple, yet it's very powerful. Reverend Andy and I had the opportunity to have a meal with Don Miguel Ruiz at a conference we were at, and he's this little man. He's small in stature, but he's got a great little impish grin, and he's very humble and quiet, but the wisdom that's in here is very powerful. And it's good, I think, to review it every once in a while. And I know that Reverend Sue and Reverend David did a great job of going over the other agreements, but I'd just like to do a quick recap. Maybe you weren't here for those, so just do a real quick recap on the points of this book. And Don Miguel Ruiz talks about the fact that as we grow up, we go through the process of domestication. You know, we start out as little children that we're very self-directed, and we know what we want, and we yell until we get it. And as we grow up, we learn the ways of the world. We learn the rules of society. We learn the rules of our family. And we want to please our parents and do things that make them happy. And so we begin to be outer-directed rather than inner-directed, some of us. We begin to look to the outside for validation, like, is what I'm doing okay? And then we spend the rest of our lives learning that it's what's inside that's important, right? There are, I think, although I think that there are some people born with that knowing. Our son Ben, who's 30 now, grew up in this teaching from the time he was about 11. But even before that, when he was a baby, he was kind of an old soul. I remember giving him a swat on the butt for something when we used to spank, and just a little swat, and he turned around and looked at me like, "How dare you hit me?" And he was probably a year and a half, and then I swatted him a little bit more to get him to do what I wanted, and he did the same thing. He looked at me, and I went, "Oh, this isn't going to work." I'm going to have to become abusive. This isn't going to work. So I couldn't, but he had a sense of himself. That some children have, I think. And growing up with parents who are involved in this teaching is a wonderful thing, because you look at it in a different way. So we become domesticated. We learn the rules of the world, what we need to do to survive and to please other people. And now we have these tools, the Four Agreements, which help us get back to our own self and decide what it is, because we learn from society and from our parents the beliefs. Sometimes those beliefs are not beliefs that we agree with, but when we grow up with them, they are just reality to us. They're the lens from which we view the world. So using these 4 agreements gives us an opportunity to shift our paradigm, put a new set of lenses, see through the eyes of love and compassion and truth, and change the way we look. Like, I'll talk a little bit about the wonderful Wayne Dyer today, who made transition, who always said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So when you change the beliefs that we have, our reality switches. So the first agreement is, I think, one of the most difficult. Be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. And we know that that is important in this teaching, isn't it? Because our word is what creates. We learn to not say I am and put anything negative after it, because we're proclaiming the truth of ourselves. We're speaking our word. And as we speak our word, we create. So it's very powerful. The second agreement is, I meant to say the second agreement is the one that is difficult. I think the second one, for me, because I grew up very outer directed. I wanted to make everybody happy. I wanted to make my parents happy. I wanted to make my teachers happy. I was always checking in with everybody outside of me to see what they thought of me. And the second agreement is, don't take anything personally. And if you're looking at your outside world for validation, this is a really tough agreement. Because there's always going to be people that criticize us, right? What Don Miguel says, it's never, when someone criticizes us, it is never about us. It is always about them. That's a hard one to get. Because we all live in our own world, in our own dream, he calls it. We all have our own reality. And who am I to say that your reality is wrong, what you're doing is wrong? Because I'm coming from my paradigm, from my world, my dream, and judging yours. And how are you to say that my actions are not right? Because if we look at the perfection of the universe, it's all unfolding in a perfect way. Even if we make a mistake, we're learning from those mistakes, and it's leading us in a certain direction. The third agreement is, don't make assumptions. We so often make assumptions about things without checking them out with other people. I remember once, this probably happened to you. I think it's happened to everybody. I was in a restaurant or something, and I saw a friend or someone I liked, and I waved, and they looked and just turned right away. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're mad at me. I've done something wrong. I had this whole scenario in my head. And of course, I found out that they didn't even see me. So Ruiz says, check it out. Have the courage to ask before you make an assumption. In relationships, this creates all kinds of problems. I think Andy's mad at me because he's grumpy or something, and really he's just doing his own thing and it has nothing to do with me. So that's an important agreement. And then the one that I'm talking about today is always do your best. Now, when I read this book, I really got into the first 3 agreements. They're juicy and good. And the fourth one, okay, always do your best. You know, I didn't really resonate with it that much. But the more I've been playing around with it this week and thinking about it, it's really important. Ruiz says that if we follow the first 3 agreements, our best gets better. It's easier to do our best. He also says sometimes our best is better than other times. You know, I'm a morning person, so when I get up in the morning, I'm fresh and ready to go, and at least after my morning coffee, and my best is going to be better than it is at 10:30 or 11 when I'm getting ready to go to bed. Now, Andy's a night person. He wakes up then, so his best might be different. But, you know, as long as we do our best for whatever is happening at the time, then we can never judge ourselves or get down on ourselves because we've done our best. And it's simple. Our best is simple and natural. Our best is following our passion, doing what we love to do. Sometimes we think we have to try really hard. I have to do my best, stress and strain and work at it and do my best and climb that ladder. When actually it's so much easier than that. There's a wonderful story in the book about a man who wants to transcend suffering. So he goes to a master at a Buddhist temple and says, "Master, if I meditate 2 hours every day, how long will it take me to transcend?" And the master says, "Oh, my son, it may take you 10 years if you meditate 2 hours every day." And he says, "Okay, what about if I meditate 4 hours a day?" And the master said, "Well, my son, then it may take you 20 years to transcend." And he said, "Well, why? Because I'm working harder at it." And he said, "That's exactly why. You're not supposed to work hard at it. You're supposed to live your life. Live your life. Be in joy. Be alive. Be in the world. Be awake and aware." And sometimes when you do your best, it is about taking action, doing something, taking some action, which may or may not be popular. Sometimes some of the actions we take, some of the changes we make are not necessarily popular with other people. You feel it's right within, but it may not be popular with other people. When Reverend Andy and I decided to retire from the church in Fremont, it was not really popular decision. And people didn't understand it. Many people didn't understand, but we knew that we had to follow our own inner voice. And taking action because it feels right, not because you're looking for a reward. Let me read to you something from the book. Doing your best, you are going to live your life intensely. You are going to be productive. You're going to be good to yourself because you will be giving yourself to your family, to your community, to everything. But it is the action that is going to make you feel intensely happy. When you always do your best, you take action. Doing your best is taking the action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. Most people do exactly the opposite. They only take action when they expect a reward, and they don't enjoy the action. And that's the reason why they don't do their best. So it's doing your best because it feels right, because it's joyful, because you're passionate about it. Taking action for those reasons. So it's good to be clear, each one of us, about what our best is. I've been contemplating this week, and I say, oh, I just kind of yelled at Andy. Is that my best? To think about what it is. And I discovered something, that when I honor and take care of myself, it's easier to do my best. And my best is better. I'm very clear that when I meditate every day, every morning, my best is better. Because I'm connected with, and I remember that I'm one. I'm connected with my inner truth. Rather than getting buffeted by the outside effects, I go within. I had an interesting experience. Last April, I fell and injured my knee quite severely, and I had to have surgery. And I was laid up for quite a while, very helpless. Andy had to do everything for me. I couldn't even get up off the couch or out of the bed. Yes, he was my wonderful angel. But I would get discouraged sometimes because it didn't seem to be getting better. And it was very hard for me to lay around and not do anything. But what I learned was when I went within and did the inner work, my knee would start to get more flexible. I'd start to get more movement in my knee. And when I lamented and just, asked him about it, physical therapy, what do I need to do? And it didn't. But it was when I went within and did that inner work that I could be my best. then I would see physical healing, and it's still healing, but it's, as you see me a little gimpy on the stage, but it's so much better than it was, and I really learned a powerful lesson about all of it really is, the power really is within. So Wayne Dyer, I said I was going to talk a little about Wayne Dyer, who recently made his transition, you know. A wonderful teacher and author who made a big impact on the world, and he did his best. He grew up in foster homes and in an orphanage, and you know, part of the time he had a tough upbringing. They never had much money, and he tells a story about one day he came home from school crying because he overheard some of the teachers talking about him and saying he was a scurvy elephant. And the mom didn't know what that was, so she went in the next day, this foster mom, and talked to the school. And they said, oh, we said he's a disturbing element. And so Wayne Dyer, even though he had a tough upbringing, had a sense of himself. He really wasn't into making other people happy. He was kind of doing his own thing, even as a kid, being a disturbing element. Sometimes when you do your best, you're a disturbing element. Sometimes that happens. So, but he went on and he wanted to be a teacher. He really wanted to be a teacher. He felt like he had something to give. So he went to college and he became a high school counselor, and then he became a professor. He became a doctor. He got his doctorate, and he was teaching psychology at Wayne State University, working on a tenure track, and had a popular private practice. He was teaching positive. He was doing our teaching, wasn't he? He was teaching what we teach here in religious science and doing very well. And so you would think, wow, he's reached success. Here he is. He started out in an orphanage, and he's a college professor. He's made it to the pinnacle. He's done his best. He's a success. But no, that wasn't his best. His best changed. He wrote a book called Your Erroneous Zones. And when the publisher wouldn't market it as much and get it out in the world as much as he wanted, Wayne bought up all the rest of the books, like 2,000 or 3,000 books, put them in his trunk, and went around and did it himself on his own dime. He quit his professor job. He went in when he had this epiphany and said, I'm quitting in like 2 weeks. And he said it was very difficult for him to do that because he grew up poor. And he had to support his family. But he had this inner knowing that this was the right thing to do. So he quit and went on the road and took his books to small towns all over the country and went into radio stations and TV stations, and people started calling in. He got popular. He ended up in something he'd been visualizing his whole life, was being on Johnny Carson. His book started getting more and more popular and selling more and more. It got on the bestseller list. It's actually one of the biggest selling books of all time. Either 25 or 35 million, I don't remember copies. Wayne Dyer, in his lifetime, wrote 40 books, and 20 were on the bestseller list. So his best didn't stop when he had that first book. It kept going and going and going. And he had the courage to take action and to live his best life. And look at how many people he impacted. And he didn't do it for money. He did it for this passion that he had, that the message that he had, he wanted to get it out. He made more money in the first year after he left his professor position than he did in all the previous years of his earning. He ended up getting $1 million book deal. So I think he's very inspirational. When we do our best, we come from that inspirational spot, that passionate love, that compassion, that oneness. There's a great story I love about the Dalai Lama, and who was in a hotel room somewhere in the world, and a woman came and knocked on the door, and she was the maid, and she said, oh, I came to clean your room, I'm so sorry, I'll come back later. And he went, no, come in. Sit down. Tell me about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get to this country? Where is your family? What do you love? He sat there and talked to her for the longest time. They had a wonderful conversation. Because he was doing his best. He saw her. How many times are there people in our lives, like the person that checks us out in the grocery store, that we don't really see? So I think doing our best means waking up to everyone around us and knowing that we're all one. It doesn't matter what we're doing. Marianne Morrissey says, not Marianne Morrissey. Yes, Marianne Morrissey says when the woman's checking you out at the grocery store, read her name tag. Greet them by name. And when you do that, you'll see that they're surprised most of the time. So the next day, the rest of that story about the Dalai Lama is the next day he opened his door to leave, and there was a line of people outside the door, of people the people that clean the rooms, waiting to talk to him. Now that's an example of doing your best. That's something that any of us can do. Because in order to do your best, you have to be awake, don't you? We have to wake up and say, oh, that's a real person in front of me. And we're all one. To be curious about the world around us and courageous enough to step out when it's time to do that. Action is required to do our best, to live fully. And sometimes the action is to leave a job, a relationship, a city. I'll read another excerpt. Action is about living fully. Inaction is the way that we deny life. Inaction is sitting in front of the television every day for years because you are afraid to be alive and take the risk of expressing what you are. Expressing what you are is taking action. You can have many great ideas in your head, but what makes the difference is the action. Without action upon an idea, there is no manifestation, no results, no reward. Have you ever had a great idea and didn't act on it? I have. Is anybody here? Yeah. What if we all had the courage to act on those ideas? And I have regrets. I remember, having some ideas that were so brilliant, but I listened to that committee in my head that said, what makes you think you could do that? Nobody will come if you do it, or, that whole, you have that voice sometimes in your head? Instead of listening to the small, still voice that's calling us forth, Because you won't always be, even if you have an intention to live these 4 agreements, you're not always going to be impeccable with your word. Sometimes we're going to fall off. You're not always going to remember to not take it personally. And sometimes you're going to let it hit you very close to the heart. You're not always going to remember to not make assumptions. You're going to jump to a conclusion that's not true. But the important thing is to love ourselves enough to start again, to do our best. When we mess up, when we have that brilliant idea that we don't follow through on, instead of beating ourselves up for not doing that, just go on to the next idea, because we know that spirit is infinite, right? There's an infinite number of creative ideas. Because we didn't act on one doesn't mean that more won't come. It's listening to that inner voice that we have. And because you are here in this church, I would suspect that most of you are about the business of transformation, allowing yourself to transform into your best self. Your most loving, compassionate, peaceful, successful, joyous, abundant self. And that comes when we honor the voice within and listen. Like Andy's beautiful song, Spirit, lead me and guide me. Spirit, lead me and guide me. When we do that, when we listen to the voice of Spirit, our best gets better. And we take risks like Wayne Dyer and leap out. So I'd like to close with a reading from Ernest Holmes, because I know we can talk about Don Miguel Ruiz, who is wonderful, but Ernest Holmes is also. And this is one of my favorite passages from the book called This Thing Called You. And it really fits in with this. So you can close your eyes if you want. It's really beautiful. I cleanse the windows of my mind that it may become a mirror reflecting inspiration from the Most High. I do this not with strenuous effort, but through quiet contemplation, through gently reaching and affirming an inward recognition. Today, I walk in the pathway of inspiration. There is an inspiration within me which governs every act, every thought, with certainty, with conviction, with peace. The key that unlocks the treasures of the kingdom of good is in my hand. I unlock the doorway of my consciousness and gently open it, that the divine presence may flood my whole being with light, illumine my being with its radiant glow, and direct my footsteps into the pathway of peace and joy. Don Miguel Ruiz says we can create heaven or hell. By our choices, we create living in the dream of heaven or living in the dream of hell. I say today, we choose heaven. We're impeccable with our word. We don't take anything seriously. We don't make assumptions. And then we go forth and live our best life right here and right now. Thank you for being here.
Love.